All right, another episode of Scaling Secrets. I'm Dan Maddox, and we're joined today by Johnny Saye with StaleChips, which is an innovation agency that's grown to be pretty successful. We're going to talk about how you've grown it and to be so successful, but I think we're going to start out with the most basic question, which is for the people who may not understand, what is an innovation agency? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So in the case of StaleChips, so there are a variety of innovation agencies out there. All they're trying to do is be broad problem solvers.
Okay.
So at StaleChips, what we focus on is helping people solve their own problems. So you don't have to hire, say, a big four agency that comes in and charges you a few $1,000,000 and then gives you a PowerPoint and leaves you alone with no capacity to actually solve the problem. In our case, we try and give you the skill set needed to solve your own problems through things like design thinking, agile, common problem-solving techniques, but tried and tested. Fortunately, me and my partner have each done over like 600 or 700 projects each. And when you get enough repetition, you recognize patterns. And so we only use things that we know work so that you can solve, let's say a problem is let's see, what would be the most fun? So you could build apps, you could do digital problem solving, you could design products, right? That's one piece, but that just gives you that gives you the thing. What you need is people capable of solving their own problems so that the thing they build, actually gets implemented because they have ownership, because they care about it. So we try and focus on that culture piece by training in innovation, which is just...
So like culture with the employees is what you're focused on. That's not necessarily like logistics of that. Okay.
Yeah. It's just training people on the process of making better decisions quicker and actually understanding how the creative process works. It's always the same regardless of what you make. It's the reason I've been able to help build, say, apps like the Uber of security, or buildings, or juice flavors, or logistic management platforms for the military.
So you've worked with brands. I was looking at your website, Ford, Cisco, a lot of different branches of the military, IBM. Like, give me an example of military when you're coming in and trying to work with the culture. How is that something that you address and tackle?
So there's two elements that I think help in our case. One is my partner, John, his 12 years in the Navy. He actually ran all his projects like experiments, trying to figure out how do you actually change the culture in this rigid structure that operates under a lot of bureaucracy. There's hierarchy, there's rank. What you have on your sleeve makes an enormous difference to how you treat one another. So how can you be creative in a scenario where if you speak out and say something slightly different than what you're expected to say, you're chastised? So that becomes a complex process that involves not just us coming in, but also the people inside have to give you the top cover, the protection, the confidence that you're allowed to make a few mistakes. And so shifting that culture isn't as easy as like coming in one day. You have to actually build the people up. And fortunately for us, in the case of the U.S., that is a priority, is that people are becoming their own problem solvers again within the Department of Defense. And our skill set is to help scale that faster, because the countries that we're playing against and the tax dollars we're spending need to be reduced, or the countries we're playing against, we need to be ahead of them. And so thinking better on your feet, making decisions right the first time, or failing fast, and then being able to learn from that are extremely the characteristics that we need.
How do you teach someone in the military that? I mean, I get maybe, going into Ford or Cisco, IBM, but like when, these are people that are very rigid and they have protocols, and how do you...
Their structure's rigid, but the people are the same.
Okay.
People are people regardless of where you are. If I go to a group of kindergartners and train them how to solve a given problem, it's going to be the same process as if I go to the Navy SEALs. We don't change that much as humans. I mean, I know we like to think we've evolved greatly, but biologically, we're pretty much in the same place we were, thousands of years ago, and our decision-making process reflects that.
So I want to go a little bit more in depth with that. So what does that training look like? Is it like a counseling session? Is it a PowerPoint? I mean,
never.
I take it it's
never.
Not
you would never want to do that.
Right.
The way that people learn how to make their own decisions is through repetition, kind of not scenario playing, but actually putting them in the space to do that. So there's elements of it. One is to participate in the experience. So go through a problem solving session. So then you understand, oh, this does work. It's not like I'm telling you to hit the I believe button forever. I just need you to believe for an hour and a half. And at the end of that hour and a half, you'll understand that this process helps you make decisions faster and that the results are better.
And it's different for everywhere you go, right?
So we customize it to the scenario, but in a broad scheme of things, it's like the scientific method. Like if you're going to try and cure cancer, the scientific method gives you a process to tackle that. The same goes for tackling whatever problem is at hand. So we have these steps that you follow through regardless of where you're at. The tools we use, you could call them modules, exercises. They blend things that kindergarten teachers have used that are playful. Psychologists and psychiatrists have used these, and then designers. So it's a blend of those elements to try and get to a result without losing their engagement. Because one big piece of solving a problem is actually people can't focus that long. And so in a team setting, people break apart a lot faster just because of their attention span.
You work with, I mean, like the scale here of clients that you work with, I mean, it's pretty broad, right? Like different industries, different, I mean, what would you say is like the number one, how do people get in the way of themselves that you see when you go into these different situations over the years doing this?
So we have a course on this called Don't Take It Personally, America's favorite game show. That's not on the internet, except it is. And it goes through the different personalities that you commonly run into in your workplace, in your workshops, in your problem-solving process. Those could be a seasoned Susan. So that's an individual who's been around.
Seasoned Susan?
Yeah, no offense to Susans out there.
Okay.
But those are individuals who have been around a long time and they've seen it before. We've tried it before. Now, an important lesson from that would be from Webvan, who I'm sure none of us know about. Webvan was from 2001, I believe, is whenever they hit their peak.
This is a company.
It's a company.
Okay,
They raised over $100 million.
Okay.
They were online demand grocery delivery in 2001. That idea sounds remarkably familiar, right? Yep. With Instacart, which is valued, $6 billion or more now? So the right idea at the wrong time can get you nothing. And that's what, with Seasoned Susan, that's one way to handle them and say, hey, look, I need you to hit the I believe button because sometimes timing is more important than we can even understand. What didn't work 10 years ago, even though it's an old idea, can be an incredible idea today. And so that's kind of the elements of our course is to teach you how do you convince these people to believe long enough that they feel through the experience of a workshop and then are committed to actually learning the elements of it themselves.
So a lot of it's maybe learning different personality types. I mean, that's pretty big. I mean, there's Seasoned Susan. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, there's your bossy boss who's going to try and control everything. There's Shy Sam who has great ideas but isn't willing to contribute. There's a big blend, the engineer brain, the person who needs to know every step in the process before they even start the process. So there's a lot of elements. We have 15 different personalities. I'd say there's probably 5 core personalities that repeat the most, and being able to kind of facilitate a conversation, a collaboration amongst those is important. But then knowing how to put all the tools together so that you can go from, hey, we don't even know what our problem is to here are 4 potential solutions to the problem, and here's how we're going to build those out and test those for as cheaply as possible. And get data so that we can be informed on our decision making.
And I'm sorry, it's Seasoned Susan, right?
Seasons.
So I worked in an industry before coming into the PR world, which is what I'm doing now. Obviously, there were a lot of Seasoned Susans.
Susans. Yeah,
there's a lot of.
I'm sure there is.
It seems like that particular industry that I was in was dealing with what they are calling as the mass exodus right now. Are you seeing that a lot? Is that something? I mean, how's that challenge what you're doing? Are you seeing it where you go into these different companies and brands?
You know what's funny is it sounds pretend, but you run into these people, and I think of one. I was doing a project.
Is it a thing? Is it
a thing in every industry? The people in life, that's how it works out. People over a certain generation, under a certain generation, act a certain way and respond a certain way. It's just how society trained them at that time. So I was in rural Portugal working on a project for a paper company, Navigator. It's like the largest paper company in Europe. And we were trying to figure out process improvement across the entire company. So we did a rapid scan, which is an hour and a half session with every single individual employee of the company, wherever they were located, in groups no bigger than 10 people. What that allows you to do is build a map of the universe. Like, here are all the core problems, here are the patterns of problems, and then here's where, if we solve this, it would bring us the most ROI. So we were doing this with one individual who was an engineer in his 70s, had helped build the company from the very beginning. He hated every second he was there for the first 45 minutes. And then of our session together.
Okay.
And then once you give someone the opportunity to share and they realize someone's listening and asking interesting questions and inviting them to share deeper, they feel heard, and then they're willing to go a step farther and lead them closer and closer to the water. That is, believing that this process of problem solving can work. And so over the course of that hour and a half, we brought him from literally, we had our group of 9 people, and then he and I were one group because he wouldn't play with anyone else. So by the end of that process, he was committed and ready to actually dive all in. So sometimes the people like a seasoned Susan who push back the strongest become your biggest allies, your biggest supporters. So I would say, yes, in every industry, they occur. And that's why one of our issues with StaleChips is that, like, when you're a Swiss Army knife that can solve a wide variety, like, yeah, we can help build apps, we can help train your team on innovation, we could help do employee experience or work with HR. Problems are problems and people are people. So the process is the same. We don't claim to be experts in all those categories. What we claim to be is experts in the process of problem solving.
It sounds like you've seen the good and the bad of what impacts different industries and different problems. Without taking one of your sessions, like, what would be some advice you could give to some entrepreneurs, like, to avoid the pitfalls that you see?
Yeah. So
right now, without getting too in depth.
So for entrepreneurs with existing teams or entrepreneurs working on their own?
Both.
Okay. So if you're working on your own, do not spend any money actually, like, going out, like, trying to build this huge version of the idea. There are plenty of ways to build an idea for free or cheap. That could be using Midjourney to make a fake version of your idea, putting it on social media, advertising that, connecting it to a landing page, and tracking signups. You could do that for $20. Okay, that would be my one advice for entrepreneurs starting out, because so many people spend $250,000 of their life savings on an idea only to realize there's no customers. You want the customers on the front, because then that helps you get investors, but that also helps you get money and income and revenue before you're spending all this money. But for entrepreneurs that have a team, I would say, honestly, most entrepreneurs, you have to have like a kind of like a bit of an ego in you, and you can fall into that trap where you believe in your solution so much that your team members are giving you good intel and you're not listening. So taking at least a weekly pause for an hour to do something like stop, start, and continue, where you share what's going well within our team and what's working, what seems off, what's not going well, and what's holding us back, and then creating a few practical solutions to that. I mean, this is a big office. I see that there's sound cushions on the walls.
Right.
An example
That's
of that.
We went upstairs, by the way.
I was going to say an example of that is everyone's trying to focus and work, and then one person on a phone call makes it so loud that those people can't get their job done. That creates friction in between people, but then also lowers everybody's productivity. So what would be a solution to that? I mean, some sound cushions or whatever on the wall, shifting offices. There's a bunch of different solutions, but you figure out the most practical, you make a change, you win loyalty over with your employees and trust, and you have a process established to continuously improve. So that would be like one way an entrepreneur could use like a piece of what we do.
So I want to talk a little bit about you. Before coming into this world, you were a professional soccer player.
Yeah.
A journalist.
I can give you. Here's the movie.
Like, how does one fall into this?
So I'll do the fastest version of my life story as I can. So I'm from Monroe, Louisiana. We're famous for Delta Airlines.
Okay.
We did that. First bottling Coca-Cola. We did that. Duck Dynasty. That happened to us.
Oh, okay.
That happened to us.
Okay. That happened to us.
That happened to us.
Okay.
Yeah, so my city peaked in the early 1900s, we could say, and it's been on deteriorating, just disaster path since.
They're not going to like that.
We're number one in violent crime, in human trafficking. Okay. We're number one at the things you don't want to be. There's multiple high schools in my city that aren't accredited, which means if you go there, you can't go to college.
Wow.
The lowest graduation rate in the country, some of these schools. So from a place that has problems, and I grew up on the right side of the tracks. I got lucky.
Cool.
Right? And then that gives you a lot of perspective when my mom founded a children's museum, so a place where kids can learn and play at the same time. So like playing with a purpose. So it was right on the line between, you could say, society, but I would say one race over here and one race over here. And it was welcoming to everybody. And in a place where, you know, you grow up and everyone looks like you, and then you go to another place and everyone looks different. It made me realize I wanted to be different. I didn't want to be the version that was around me. And so I thought I was going to be an NBA player. I'm 5'7". Didn't pan out.
Happen.
But at 14, I saw soccer on TV for the first time, and I went all in. And if you practice something enough, I'm not athletic. I can jump like maybe 7 inches. I'm not fast. I don't have any reason to think I should be an athlete. But I practiced 5 hours a day, every day, from the time I was 14 to 22. I got on a college team. We won the national championship. I moved to Brazil by luck. Played on some teams down there. Paid someone to help me with my visa. They disappeared with my money. So I ended up living with a teammate in the slums down there. And learning more about life. Saw kids sell cocaine on the street at 9 in the morning. Saw a guy do a line off his bicycle seat. Saw AKs, chain necklaces. The road to get into our neighborhood, they had knocked down a tree and cut out a space this big. That space is big enough for a motorcycle tire so that if cops are behind you, you can go through and the cops can't follow you. At night, when you pulled into the neighborhood, you had to turn off your headlights, turn on the light above your head so they could see your face. If you didn't do that, you were going to get jumped. Stuff like that. So you go from my grow up on the perfect, don't lock your doors type scenario to kind of forcing myself into a world where I'm on the opposite end, taught me about life.
Let me ask you a little bit more about that. I want to learn more about that experience.
Yeah.
So you went down the...
So my teacher in history of soccer, which was a class at my school, turned out to be a FIFA agent and have a really, really small team in a place called Pau Grande. Now, I'm not going to curse, but that means something inappropriate in Portuguese.
Okay.
Like hidden in the mountains near like a riverbed, so at the bottom of the mountains in a jungle, right? Just this crazy place. So it wasn't my first time to Brazil either. I had flown there and trained with like an academy a few years before that. Okay. So I thought I had it under control, right? And so I came back, go to this place in the middle of nowhere, live in this tiny apartment and train with this random team of players that are all like 19 to 23, all former players on really big teams. But what happens is in professional soccer, once you hit 19, it's like, do we need you or not? No, you get released. And so you try and find a team you like. Went from dreaming you were going to be on the best team in the country to now you have no money, no income, and no education. So it was me and these like incredible players and one guy who was from Jackson, Mississippi, who actually he captained the U.S. I think it was U18 or 21 team to the first win against Brazil. Me and this guy go down to Brazil together, play on this team together. It's not working out on that team. Bounce to another team. End up sharing a bed, playing on this big team with the reserves. Looks like we're going to get that. Finally make it, and he gets a call to come back to the U.S. to go play for Atlanta. And so he took it and like went for it. And his life is a whole another insane story where he got if you go to a professional sport at a young age, you kind of get bad habits because you're living with these men that are going out partying all the time. And he just picked up some bad habits and it led him down a path that unfortunately led him to jail, selling drugs, shooting at people. That was his path. So my path took me to, all right, let's keep playing. Like, I'm going to make it happen. And so I met this guy who my agent said was trustworthy, and it just didn't work out. Sometimes you make a decision and you just live with the consequences. And so it didn't work out. And when that happened, I mean, he kind of just stole my dream is the way I saw it. But when I came back to the States, you can't come back from not having warm showers or electricity or living with holes in your ceiling. Or, I mean, one day I got attacked by mosquitoes.
Oh, wow.
I woke up in the middle of the night and I called my mom crying. I was like, I can't see. And the mosquitoes had bit my eye. It was swelled shut. I couldn't see anything. So you live through all these like experiences that sound like they're fake.
Yeah.
Like that they're from a movie. After having no stressors in life, and kind of changes like your process of what you want to do in life. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. This is not the movie trailer version. I went in deep.
That's okay.
You seemed interested.
Yeah.
So then I start bouncing around the U.S., playing on lower level soccer teams, end up in Philadelphia, meet a girl who is Spanish, think she's awesome, start dating her. Then I'm like, I don't have enough money, so I become a manny for a family. A male nanny.
Okay.
In Bala Cynwyd, it's kind of like a higher end neighborhood outside of Philly.
Okay.
The dad helped found Redbox.
Okay.
He also helped found Golia. Anybody know Golia?
Not.
It's Mongolia's finest vodka. So he trusted me with this kid, and he thought, well, this guy could be helpful. I'm charming, right, in my own way. Maybe he can help me sell vodka. And so I sold vodka door to door.
Door to door or bar to bar?
Bar to bar. I would say door to door because that's what it felt like.
Okay.
In Philly, South Philly, with my accent.
How was that?
That's where you learn how to understand a person's needs. Vodka is all the same across the board. Essentially, there's no difference. If someone tells you there's a difference, they're lying. Right? So I would sell it as gluten-free. This was, 2015 or whatever. That was new. All vodka is gluten-free, okay? All vodka is gluten-free. Some people didn't know that. Let's say all people didn't know that.
Was it good?
It tastes like vodka. Here's the trick with vodka. If you keep it ice cold, it tastes good. So I carry it around.
Well,
I promise.
I can taste the difference.
Well,
you would say no. You would disagree with me?
I would say, okay, at the $27 a bottle mark, there's not really a difference in flavor.
Like, I'm not saying you can taste the difference between like Grey Goose and Kettle One, but there's definitely a difference between like Kettle One, Tito's,
Skull,
or you know what I mean? Like, there's definitely
Skull back home. No, Skull was like $5 a handle or something.
I remember. Yes.
But essentially,
not Stoli, right?
No, Skull.
Okay.
This was like you buy it at CVS.
Okay.
Yeah, Louisiana prices.
Okay.
So it might be different. But no, if you go watch the Mythbusters episode for me, and they break down trying to taste test vodka, it's really hard for the average person to know any difference, especially if it's cold. So if it's warm, there's a huge difference in flavor, enormous. So I took Mars around freezing cold, ice cold, so
that
cold.
Was the trick.
Yeah, and I went to every Asian restaurant and said, this is Mongolia's finest vodka. It's the only Asian vodka on the market. It was. And sold it there. I went to vegan restaurants, like forward-thinking restaurants. This is gluten-free. I went to Philly spots, like that are local, and said, hey, this is from Philly. I know it says Mongolia on the bottle. The owner lives right down the street. He sponsored the Flyers this year. So I would find a way to meet their needs. That was true to the product, but communicated to them in the way they needed to hear it. And so I learned that everyone communicates in their own way. So with soccer, I learned the aspects of understanding how a team works. And with Portuguese, which I didn't speak, I learned how to read faces and read body language. So then with soccer, I learned that element. With selling vodka, I learned the kind of communication piece. And so I have two elements already in how to help solve problems, those communication elements.
Right.
And then I moved to Spain and do a master's in innovation. I thought I was on the beach. Turns out I was in the desert. It was an hour and a half away from the beach. Google lied to me. The state of Murcia is a beach. The city of Murcia is a desert.
Okay.
So I go to this school, start the program, 17 different countries out of 30 people. So we were super blended from all over the world. like constantly looking for more perspective. When you're from a small place, like the last thing you want to do is not leave a stone unturned. Like you want to find out all the information you can because you feel like you've been missing out on it.
Okay.
So I get there and I start working at a design agency called Rhapsodia. And they are experts in marketing campaigns, but they use the process of design thinking. They stole from a restaurant called El Bulli. It was the #1 restaurant in the world. It was in Girona. They took, say, like an orange. They would take an orange and break it down to its most basic elements. So its texture, its flavor, its color, and then they'd rebuild it in a new way. So now whatever you're eating, maybe it tastes like an orange or it feels like an orange, but it is something completely different. Well, we did that with marketing campaigns.
Okay.
Brought companies down to their most basic values and then rebuild them like Lego into something new and unique. And we got good at that. And then companies hired us to travel around Europe and figure out the future of plastic and packaging design, how grocery stores are laid out, buildings, like I said before, everything under the sun. And I got really good at this problem-solving process. And then IBM hired me to do the same thing, send me to clients and do what's called product discovery, figure out what's going on with their users, identify the core problems, and then find unique ways to solve those problems. And then IBM on the back end would do something which you shouldn't do when you actually are trying to innovate. They would take off the shelf stuff and force it into the solution because that's a good way to make money.
Okay.
But not a great way to make a solution that actually doesn't need to be revised in 2 years.
How difficult, and I actually read when I was kind of switching careers, there was a book, I think the book's called Rethink. I can't remember who wrote it. Maybe you've heard of it. Probably not. And I guess, I mean, it is very difficult for people to rethink different concepts, right? I mean, that sounds essentially what you're training people to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe
not. I mean, in the context, it's not like, I guess sometimes it's the forest through the trees. You're so close to the problem that you can't even see it. In some aspects, you could consider that rethinking. I haven't read the book, so I don't know the full context, but I like to think in that case, it's more tripping on the truth. When you make a problem so clear, so big, that you can't deny it exists, I mean, they have to rethink it. And so they change the way that they're behaving or acting or trying to solve it because it can't be ignored anymore. So, I mean, that's the switch for me, but don't know the context.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when you started this agency 3 years ago, right?
Uh-huh.
How have you grown it over the years?
We did it in an interesting way, and I've heard someone say to us that we do the flywheel in reverse. Okay, so I'll try and explain it. So he did this innovation training piece, and he had experimented with how do you teach a group of people to solve their own problems in as fast amount of time as possible, regardless of rank.
Okay.
So he'd been doing that. He landed a contract with the Navy to do that online, to build an online version that was asynchronous. So that was our first contract, and we used that contract to help write our book, make the 9 courses. Well, I think now we might have 13 in total in English, Spanish, and then some that are targeted directly to the Navy. So we use that initial contract to build out a broader offering and then leverage that broader offering to connect with more people that had that same problem outside of just the Navy, like the TSA and the Air Force or the Army.
I mean, the U.S. Navy, that's a pretty good first case study, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty good first case study, and the Navy itself is enormous. Right. So even though we had built this product for the Navy, it was only in one area, one little tiny drop of the Navy. So we had so much more room to expand. And so that's kind of where we've been focusing on since. And you could say like 2022 was like a year that it looked like we were going to be millionaires and could retire. Like we were doing very good and having a lot of success. Now in government, since we were new to it, we learned that everything comes in cycles, and those cycles follow elections. And so unfortunately, with the debt ceiling as one of the key talking points and not being able to decide that, the Senate not being able to decide that meant every DOD or military or government agency individual had to hold on to their budgets. So you go from having all these clients in a growing client base to everyone disappearing in a year's time. And it's not anything that you've done or anything you can control.
What's that like?
Tough. It makes you do what you actually don't need to do, which is my natural setting is when something's not working, it means I need to work harder. working harder 15-hour days for say 8 months will maybe get you one or two more clients. I don't think at a grand scheme of things, given the setup that we were in where no one had a budget, knocking on more and more doors doesn't mean eventually you're going to get the answer you want. The answer you know is right there, and it's that people can't spend their budget because they don't have it. So we were knocking on all these doors, burning ourselves out. And what we should have done is slowed down, adjusted, and seen what else was out there as far as away from government, looking into private, looking at some of our other aspects, or stabilizing in some other aspect, where we can have consistent income without the need to be feet on the ground or constantly selling.
But you guys, I mean, work heavily in the private sector too, right? I mean, is that?
Yeah, but the majority of our clients are our government.
Okay.
Our government, because it's so complex to get in. Once you're in, it is a competitive advantage that's very unique. When we come to the private sector, so much is like credibility and word of mouth, and that usually comes with like a lot of connections in the external world, and all of ours do align to DoD for the most part, or Spain, which isn't useful because everything I learned was in Spain. So my own connections, my network that normally you would leverage when you're starting out a business was not that. And so we kind of had to shift and adjust to how can we convince people to buy what we're selling when our competitors are MIT and Stanford, and they have that credibility behind them.
Gotcha.
And so when I say we do the flywheel in reverse, normally you sell the cheapest thing and then escalate up as their interest and the value goes up of what you're giving them. In our case, people come to us for the most expensive thing first, consistently, and then we sell them after the fact on our courses, which let you have us in your pocket at any moment. And they're hilarious and they're fun. They're us in a bottle. We are not academic. We learn this by doing it, and here's how it works, and here's why it works.
I think you get a little bit more respect
for being not academic.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. From the people that realize they learn what they need and then they use it.
Especially who aren't academics.
Like a lot of the time. I mean, because you're dealing with such like a broad group of people, like you can't guarantee that they're all going to be academic. And I would say like, maybe I'm from the outside because I'm from a small town. I never went to like a fancy school. Maybe I have a chip on my shoulder too. That like academic isn't necessarily the way. I'm all about outcomes. Like if this course can give me the information I need to solve this problem, it's useful for me, so I'm gonna do it. But so many try and talk over your head with definitions that don't apply to your daily life. It's like, no offense, math teachers, but like I wasn't great at algebra or calculus.
Oh no.
I don't need that for what I do necessarily. And I know it applies in scenarios, but I don't need to talk calculus to someone who's not doing math problems. And that's so often what it feels like in that kind of academic scenario.
Gotcha. And kind of as we wrap up here, when you go in, is it more difficult to change a culture now than you think it would be 5 years ago? Just with AI, new technology, greater social media use.
I think
usage.
things
become more challenging.
I think things get easier as people like right now in the world, we shift our focus from religion to brands to people to influencers. So people's willingness to change and like their loyalty to things has shifted greatly. When I'm sure when you look at stats, I would assume that now, even though throughout history, modern history, people, their bank account, like the bank you bank with, is it your parents' bank? Was your first bank your parents' bank?
It is not, no.
Okay.
It's a much larger bank than my first initial bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like as you grow, you've shifted, but traditionally the bank that you have is your parents' bank. And your parents probably started off with their parents' bank.
Right.
And you just fall into that kind of scenario. Culture in general has shifted in the way that they see that, where you can change. You don't have that loyalty or commitment. You're looking for the best value. And maybe that's because there's not like a religion as much, or like there's other elements, or things just change faster. So the hard part is that culture can't stay. Like companies make great culture and then people evolve and change, and there's not that ability to focus long enough to like keep that culture going. I mean, IDEO is probably like the most well-known design thinking company in the world, and now they've had to lay off like 2/3 of their workforce, and they've had backlash for how they treat employees. But they were supposed to be the place, or Airbnb was supposed to be the place, or Facebook was supposed to be the place where you go and you work and you live, and it's amazing. Things change, culture changes like too fast for people to be able to like stay there long enough. They demand more, or they feel mistreated, or things just like what's acceptable changes quickly. That's the hard part. Not that it's not the opposite. People want to change. So that's the hard part.
I appreciate your perspective.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on today. Can you tell people how they can find you and follow you?
Yeah, sure. Our best thing is to follow us on LinkedIn. We're StaleChips. If you type in StaleChips on Google, I think we're right near the top.
I didn't ask you about the name.
How
did you get to the name?
So there is like a concrete process to making names. It's pretty simple,
Yeah.
and there's like a PDF I could send you that teaches you how to name anything.
Okay.
But we made a list of like 150 names, all funny names because we try and make things punny. That was going to be my first job out of college, was actually writing headlines for newspapers.
Okay.
So I like that. I like
Okay.
naming things.
Okay.
So we had this list of 150. We narrowed it down to 3. And I thought one was the best. It was called Uncut Gems. An important lesson to learn. Look up on Google what you're going to name your company. So many people don't do this.
Okay.
So I look it up, and the first thing that comes up is a documentary on circumcision in Africa.
Oh, no.
And that was like the top results.
And you were going to name it what?
Uncut Gems.
Uncut Gems. Okay.
Yeah. Not like gems like, hey, I'm Jim so-and-so.
Okay, yeah,
but like
don't Google
diamonds.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so once I saw that, it's like, okay, that's not our company name. So we went next on the list, and we had StaleChips, and it mixed the elements that we wanted in a name. It was playful, but you could make something out of it. Like StaleChips, don't let your business reach its expiration date, right? Like you could do something unique with it. The DoD feels stale. Everyone has a chip on their shoulder. There's so many ways you can play with the name, and when you read the book Made to Stick, which is my favorite book of all time, it teaches you ways to communicate ideas that stick, that people remember. And one of those elements is what we used in StaleChips.
Okay.
So you can remember our name. It's like way different than Management Consulting LLC,
Yeah.
right? Which is who we're competing against.
Exactly. I love it.
Yeah.
Johnny Saye, StaleChips, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, man. Thank y'all.